So all I will talk about is the joint work with Nermin Salimji from Lyon. And so the first thing I would like to do before discussing this simplicial complex is to tell you, well, for me, what is the general motivation to study this object. And for me, the general motivation is something which I call random topology. Random topology. So the motivation for me is to investigate this subject. And I would say you are already quite prepared to listen to this because the previous talk by Antonio Lerario is already fits in this framework. So let's say the following. So what would be a key question? Say, or a central question in this subject. Say. So for instance, consider some polynomial p in a n+1 variable, say homogeneous polynomial. Say homogeneous polynomial, say of degree d in n+1 variable. And then you consider sets of roots of this polynomial, Vp or RVP, sets of real roots in the real projective space. So everybody knows this real projective hypersurface. You know that depending the topology of this hypersurface very much depends on the polynomial in general, on the choice of the polynomial. And this sort of immediately raises the question, well, if you pick a polynomial at random, which topology to expect for this hypersurface? So pick P at random, which topology to expect for this real projective hypersurface? So this is the main theme of, I would say, this random topology. So you have a random variable, probability space. Well, I should tell you what is the probability measure. I won't do it because I will discuss something different today. But you have a probability space, which is a set of homogeneous polynomial of degree d, and you have a random variable which provides a hypersurface whose topology depends on the choice of the element polynomial, and then you study the topology of this. So this is the first model. Say random polynomials. Random polynomials, or more generally, random real projective hypersurface. I can replace projective space by any projective, real projective manifold, and then polynomials by sections of bundles, and the same question holds. And so we did study this model with Damien Gaillet. So we obtained results on this, so joint work with Damien Gaillet. Well, I can. No, actually, we did also study a second model. And this is going to be a third model. So the second model is basically what is called a random nodal domains. Also joint work with Damien Gaillet. Well, and in the second model, basically you replace the real projective space by any closed manifold, differentiable manifold. So basically replace real projective space by some closed manifold and closed manifold. And then you replace the polynomial by something more analytic, which is linear combination of the first eigenvectors of some elliptic operators, for instance, the Laplace operator. So replace B, replace the polynomial P by linear combinations of the first eigenvectors of some, well, self-adjoint pseudo-differential elliptic operator, well, self-adjoint elliptic operator. For instance, fix a Riemannian metric on the manifold, then you have comes the Laplace-Beltrami operator acting on functions on this. So it has a sequence of eigenvalues growing to plus infinity, and below each eigenvalue you see only finitely many eigenvectors. Instead of monomials, you have these eigenvectors. You take random linear combination of these eigenvectors, and again the vanishing locus of this is what is called nodal domains. It replaces this real hypersurface, projective hypersurface, and the topology depends on the actual linear combination. There is a natural probability measure on this set, and again the question, which topology to expect for such vanishing locus. Okay. So today, I want to introduce a third model which is purely topological. So and these are, say, random, well, simplicial complex. So let me define, choose some simplicial complex, finite simplicial complex of dimension n. Finite simplicial complex of dimension n. And so with this finite simplicial complex, let me say, to begin with, so comes this set of zero-dimensional simplicial cochains with Z2 coefficients. So this is a zero-dimensional simplicial cochains with a Z2 coefficient. So of course this is nothing but the set of function epsilon from the set of vertices of K to Z over 2Z. So at this point, so this is a finite set because simplicial complex is finite. This is a finite set, so it is a probability space canonically. So this is finite vector space over Z2, but it's finite set. It is a finite set, so equipped with the counting probability measure, with the counting measure mu. So that mu of a subset A, the measure of a subset, is just the cardinality of the subset divided by the total cardinality of this set of cochains. So now what is my random variable? So for every such zero-dimensional simplicial cochain, I want to define to you a hypersurface. And well, for every such zero-dimensional simplicial cochain, I define, well, with Nermin, we define the hypersurface V epsilon exactly as in Viro patchwork theorem, which is actually a motivation to introduce this model. So we define, say, V epsilon. Let me say, as in Viro patchwork theorem. So, meaning the following, precisely. So for every simplex sigma in K, the trace of V epsilon in sigma is the convex hull of the middle points of the edges where epsilon is not constant. So for instance, example, if this is my simplicial complex K, so epsilon takes value 0 below and 1 over, then, well, I consider the middle of the edges where epsilon is not constant. I take convex hull, and this is V epsilon. So it's a hypersurface in the underlying topological space of the simplicial complex.
Do you assume that K is of pure dimension n, or?
No. No. Even though, of course, as a particular class of example, I have in mind triangulations of closed manifolds, but I do not assume a priori. So I can already give a first theorem, maybe slightly fancy, joint with Nermin strategy. And the triangulation, the theorem is the following. So if K is the triangulation, is a triangulation of a homology n manifold, then for every epsilon, V epsilon is a homology n-1 manifold. So this might look slightly fancy. Let me recall what is a homology manifold. Well, you know that a manifold, smooth manifold, is a, say, topological space which is locally modeled on Rn. And a homology manifold is a topological space whose locally, at every point, has the homology of Rn. So it's more general. A homology manifold, n manifold, is a topological space X such that for every point in X, the relative homology of X relative to the complement of the point is just isomorphic to the relative homology of Rn. So of course, you may a priori not care such homology manifold and say choose a triangulation of your favorite close manifold. But if you do this, so even though K is a triangulation of a nice smooth manifold, V epsilon might be not better than a homology n-1 manifold. Because you know a triangulation on a smooth manifold might be a little bit wild. So if the triangulation is wild, say non-piecewise linear, then such V epsilon might just be a homology n-1 manifold. However, if K is a triangulation of a homology n manifold, then V epsilon is itself n-1 manifold.
What would be like the simplest example?
Alors, indeed, there is a quite classical example. So there is a nice, I think, theorem of topology, which is the double suspension theorem of Edwards. So this theorem tells you that if you start with any, say, homology 3 manifold, and then you take twice the suspension. So recall what is the suspension of the manifold. It's say you have the manifold, and the suspension is basically double cone. So you add 2 points, and then you take the cone. So of course, if you have a homology 3 manifold, and then you take the suspension, you don't have a manifold, because you have 2 singular points, where the link is not a sphere, is a homology sphere, so it's not a manifold. So this is not a manifold. It's a four-dimensional space with 2 singular points. But now if you again take the suspension...
So you start not from a homology 3 manifold?
Homology 3 sphere. Homology 3 sphere. Poincaré 3 sphere. Start with Poincaré 3 sphere. You take, once the suspension, you have 2 singular points. You again take the suspension. Guess what? You have a 5-dimensional sphere. Topological sphere. So you take the double suspension of a homology 3 sphere, you have the standard 5-dimensional sphere. Now, of course, if your Poincaré sphere or homological sphere is equipped with a nice triangulation, there is an induced triangulation on the suspension, then again induced suspension. Now say you put zeros, this epsilon is say 0 over this first suspension, the vertices of, and then 1 here, then V epsilon is what? V epsilon is basically, well, say 2 copies of the suspension of the 3 spheres. So it's a 4-dimensional space with 2 singular points, which is not a manifold. But nevertheless, it is a homologous manifold because the link of every point has the homology of the sphere. Okay. Indeed, a nice example. But, okay, I have other things to tell. Okay. So never mind, you see that at this point, again, I have a model of random topology, so I have a topological space. I am able to produce at random a hypersurface. And so the question is, say, pick, say, epsilon at random, which topology to expect for V epsilon. And so say, let me already give you basically the theorem we were aiming at, and indeed we obtained. So of course, now I can make question a bit more precise. One way to make it a bit more precise is the following. So now I choose any integer between 0 and -1. I introduce the corresponding Betti number of V epsilon, which is the dimension of the homology of V epsilon with, no, I forgot Z2 coefficients. And
The star is P? H.
P. Thank you. Yes, the Betti number, which is dimension of the PF Betti number, which is dimension of PF homology group, say with Z2 coefficient, and the expected value for this number, which is the average over my probability space of this number. And so theorem so let K be again a finite n-dimensional simplicial complex. Then for every P, there exists universal constant say Cpn plus Cpn minus, so n is the dimension of the complex and p will be the Betti number, such that, well, this constant Cpn minus bounds from below the lim inf, so this is an asymptotic result, so I have to explain what I mean by D. Let's say the expected Betti number divided by Fn of k times factorial n plus 1 to the power d, which is less than the lim sup as d goes to plus infinity of this expected Betti number divided by Fn of k n plus 1 factorial to the power d, which is less or equal than Cpn plus. So what is Fn of k? So it's the so-called phase number. It's the number of n-dimensional simplex of the simplicial number of n-dimensional simplices in K. So that's the theorem. And what is this asymptotic process? Well, when you have this simplicial complex, there is a canonical process, which you know, which is taking the first barycentric subdivision. And now if I have a simplicial complex, I can refine the complex by taking successive barycentric subdivision of the simplicial complex. And that's what I'm doing here. So what I did denote by ED of B, it's the average of the Betti number of V epsilon, but not on zero-dimensional cochains of K, but on zero-dimensional cochain of the DF barycentric subdivision of K.
I'm sorry, do you really mean n-dimensional simplices, top-dimensional simplices, so only the number of top-dimensional simplices?
That's what you... Yes. Here indeed. Yes. What plays a role is just the number of top-dimensional and dimensional simplices in the statement. Yes.
And your...
That's what I mean.
And your space is not a pure n-dimensional...
It is not a pure, but it is an n-dimensional. There is at least one n-dimensional simplices. When you subdivide at infinity, when you take at infinity barycentric subdivision, actually the n-1 skeleton basically doesn't play any role, so it has kind of measure 0 at infinity, because this growth n+1 factorial to the power d is the growth of simplices in the n-dimensionals. So the growth would be just at most n factorial to the power d for anything which lie inside the n-1 skeleton, so that the effect is just 0 asymptotically. So now,
So it is fn of k, or not fn of sd, like if you take d times the barycentric.
it is fn of k. Actually, the whole denominator would be fn of the ds barycentric subdivision. So when you take the first barycentric subdivision, you multiply the number of top-dimensional simplices n by n+1 factorial to the power d. So this denominator is nothing but fn of the ds barycentric subdivision of k. Okay.
For example, extend your epsilon to subdivision.
No. You have to first take subdivision and then take epsilon. So forget a bit. Forget a bit the beginning. So the simplicial complex you start with, say, is the ds barycentric subdivision.
But to define your homology and this exploitation function, you need
I have a probability space which is the zero-dimensional cochain of the ds barycentric subdivision of K. This is a finite set. It is equipped with a counting measure. I average the Betti number.
So do you know anything about the C plus and C minus?
Yes, we can compute them. Unfortunately, today I won't.
But at least I imagine that you know that they are strictly positive.
Yes. Indeed. Thanks. Okay, so my plan. My plan now is to discuss a bit barycentric subdivision, because I have several things to say. And maybe, so in order to fix notations, I have maybe to recall two facts. So first of all, what is the definition of barycentric subdivision? So I hope everybody knows. So to define the first barycentric subdivision of a complex, you proceed by induction. So you increase the skeleton. So for instance, so if your complex K is an edge, then what is the barycentric subdivision? First barycentric subdivision? Well, I add the barycenter. This is an edge sigma. I add the barycenter, say sigma hat, and then take the cone on the zero skeleton. So say before, this is before an edge is just an edge. After, an edge becomes basically two edges. So, and now, if K is a triangle, this is before. Now what is after? So you already know what to do on the one skeleton. So you add the barycenters. This is on the one skeleton. And then, so say the triangle is sigma. I am adding the barycenter sigma hat and then take the cone over the one-dimensional skeleton. And this is the first barycentric subdivision. And in general, by definition, simplex of the barycentric subdivision reads sigma 0, say a P simplex, sigma 0 hat, sigma P hat, where sigma 0, sigma P are simplices of K. One being, it's a flag of simplices, so one is the face of the next one. One being the face of the next one. And sigma hat, when I put a hat, again, is the barycenter. Of sigma. So it's So for instance, on this picture, this example, say sigma 0 is this vertex, sigma 1 is this edge, and sigma 2 is the triangle. Then this new triangle in the barycentric subdivision is sigma 0 hat, sigma 1 hat, sigma 2 hat, because the barycenter of sigma 0 is here, barycenter of sigma 1 is here, and barycenter of sigma 2 is here. So this is an example. Now, second thing I want to recall is, so you may prove Poincaré duality in a closed manifold thanks to barycentric subdivision. So you put a triangulation on the closed manifold, and then you consider the first barycentric subdivision. And what is the key ingredient in the proof is to introduce what is called the dual block of a simplex. So there is a kind of dual. So let me recall what is the dual block of a simplex. The dual block d sigma of a simplex sigma in K, and the dual block is actually in the first barycentric subdivision of K, is the following. Union of simplices sigma 0 hat sigma P hat such that sigma 0 is sigma. So again, let me give you an example. This is K, and say this is sigma. So now I consider the first barycentric subdivision. And this is the dual block. So it's kind of a kind of cell which is transverse to sigma in the dual. So in Poincaré duality, basically homology will take homology in K. Simplicial homology will be isomorphic to the simplicial cohomology generated by these dual blocks. But I'm saying blocks and not cell due to the same fancy fact that if you have a wild triangulation, this dual block has the homology of Rn, but need not be a cell, I mean homeomorphic to Rn. It's a cone over homology sphere. Okay, so now I can give you a new definition of V epsilon. An alternative definition of V epsilon, which is the actual one consider. So, alternative definition of V epsilon. Well, for every zero-dimensional quotient, we may define V epsilon as the union of the closure of this block over edges such that the exterior derivative of epsilon against the edge doesn't vanish. Because I was considering edges on which epsilon is not constant, saying that epsilon is not constant or it takes two different values on both vertices of the edge, it exactly means that the exterior derivative in the sense of simplicial homology doesn't vanish on the edge. So the edges which play a role are the edges where the exterior derivative doesn't vanish, and now I just take the closure of the dual blocks. So basically, before previous definition, V epsilon was there. It was the convex hull of the middle of the edge. And now, so I first took bicentric subdivision. And now it's just kind of broken. It's no more affine, it's piecewise affine, it's broken, it passes through.
After this, it's a subcomplex, right?
It becomes a subcomplex of the first bicentric subdivision.
Homology doesn't change.
The homology doesn't change, indeed. So, and precisely, I take profit of the fact that now it is a subcomplex of the first bicentric subdivision. So the first proposition is that both definitions of V epsilon provide isotopic hypersurfaces. Now, also, let me just, before going on, and indeed taking profit of the fact that I have a subcomplex, let me mention that I'm discussing a special case. So now, this new definition makes also it possible to extend not only to hypersurface, but higher codimensional subcomplex. So the general model for us is the following. So choose k, an integer between 1 and n, then consider instead of the zero-dimensional cochain the space of k-1 dimensional cochains, so set of k-1 dimensional cochains. In the two coefficients. And, well, for every such k-1 cochain, we define V epsilon, exactly the same, the union of the closure of the blocks, dual blocks, over no more edges, but sigma is now a k-simplex in the simplicial complex, such that the exterior derivative of epsilon against sigma doesn't vanish. So this is the general definition, and this is a random subcomplex in first barycentric subdivision. So to say codimension K subcomplex. I'm sorry that I didn't plan to say anything during this. Maybe the chairman could, but... Okay, so now indeed the upshot is that I have a random subcomplex of the first barycentric subdivision. So now I can introduce, say, for every integer between 0 and n-1, I can introduce the phase numbers of this subcomplex. So Fp of V epsilon is the number of p-dimensional simplices in V epsilon as a subcomplex of the first barycentric subdivision. And the average value of this number is a mathematical expectation, the integral over my probability space of this phase number and all these phase number you can put as coefficient of the phase polynomial and of course, you have the corresponding average phase polynomial.
So you integrate over ck minus 1.
Patrick?
You integrate not over C0, but over ck minus 1.
No. It was just a remark. During this talk, I restrict myself to zero-dimensional chains. In our paper, we do the general case. But I have only 15 minutes left. And so, of course, you know from simplicial homology that the Betti number, in particular, is bounded from above by the phase number, so that the average Betti number is bounded from above by the average phase number, so that if I am able to compute this average phase polynomial, I can basically produce the upper estimates. That's what we do. So our theorem few more theorems say so. Let K be a finite n-dimensional simplicial complex. Then we have a nice formula for this average phase polynomial. It's the integral over K of the phase polynomial of the dual block with respect to some measure which I want to discuss now. So, what is this measure where M is the sum over all simplices in K, simplex of K, of the probability that the barycenter of sigma belongs to V epsilon. So this probability can be written like this. Sigma hat belongs to V epsilon times the Dirac measure on this barycenter. So this is the Dirac measure. On the barycenter sigma hat of sigma. And this is, of course, the probability that sigma hat belongs to V epsilon. So you see that in this statement, there is a finite, a measure with finite support showing up. And I will finish to discuss such kind of measures which show up in this problem. Each time you have a simplicial complex, you may play the game to put Dirac measures on the barycenter of the simplices. And another game you can play is take barycentric subdivision, and you can combine the two games, so take many times barycentric subdivision, and then put Dirac measures on the barycenter of the simplices. So this would be the most natural one, and you see that what is showing up in this theorem is that there is a weight in front of the Dirac measure, and the weight is this probability of this nice event that the barycenter belongs to V epsilon. So this is the last part. Canonical measures. Canonical measures, so let's say, again, so you choose your favorite simplicial complex, K. Then, for every p now between 0 and n, I may consider the following measure. So I put a Dirac measure on every barycenter of every p simplex. Sigma is a p simplex in K. And I have a sequence of measures with respect to D on the underlying topological space, which is the same sum where no sigma is a p simplex in the DF barycentric subdivision of K. So you see many, it's still finite support, but it kind of equidistribute in the underlying topological space of the simplicial complex. And another kind of measure you find there is immediately on the simplicial complex is a kind of Lebesgue measure. So I denote by dvol k. What is dvol k? Well, I put the standard Lebesgue measure on every n simplex. So on the standard n-dimensional simplex, there is the standard Lebesgue measure with volume 1. It doesn't depend on... It is preserved by an affine transformation, provided you normalize that the volume is 1. And so can I define it? I can define it like this. I push forward this standard Lebesgue measure of the standard simplex where on all n simplex of k. So I sum over all n simplex of k. F sigma is an isomorphism, a fine isomorphism between the standard n simplex and k. So a fine isomorphism. And this is the standard Lebesgue measure. Lebesgue measure on delta n. Okay, so these. So now theorem joint with. So there are many parts, 3 parts. First part, this probability measure, mu, the probability that the barycenter belongs to V epsilon only depends on the dimension of sigma, and it's 1 divided 1 minus 1 divided by 2 to the power dimension of sigma. So in particular, this measure m is just the sum p equals 1 to n, 1 minus 1 to the power times gamma p. So we have this canonical measure gamma p. This is just the sum. The weight in front of this Dirac measure just depends on the dimension. So it's 1 minus 1 to the power t. So the second measure is second result is about the asymptotic of this measure. So the sequence of measure weakly converges to the Lebesgue measure dvol k with a weight in front, gamma pn, where qpn is a universal constant that we can compute. And which actually already appeared in previous work of Brenty and Welker and Delucci, Pixton, and Sabalka, which already appeared. In works of Brenty and Welker and Sabalka. So why did it already appear? Basically because of the following consequence that in particular, if you have such an equidistribution result for this Dirac measure, you integrate the function 1, you deduce the following asymptotic of the phase number. So the PS phase number of P simplex of the DS barycentric subdivision of K, divided by precisely Fn of K times n plus 1 factorial to the power d converges to this universal constant Qpn. So it's actually a bit well, you have this result, you want to know what is this constant. quite natural. And the last part of the theorem, well, I put several results in a single theorem here, is about this. So you see that the measure M can be computed from this canonical measure gamma. No, I don't consider the measure gamma. I put a density in front of gamma, which is this phase polynomial of the dual blocks. And so we can compute the asymptotic of this density divided by n plus 1 factorial to the power d. Well, it doesn't matter. And this weakly converge to some universal polynomial. And so I could give you explicitly what is this polynomial, but it doesn't mean much, so let me just put universal constant. You can find the values in our paper, so this is computed explicitly. So I have 2 minutes left. So let me not give you the explicit values of this, but it gives the asymptotic. Well, it just depends on universal constant as this QPN and the number of simplex when you take first barycentric subdivision. So they are just universal constants. But so this measure weakly converges as d goes to plus infinity to this universal polynomial. So becomes constant in front of this Lebesgue measure. So from this, you can, from these results, you can deduce the constant Cn plus. Cpn plus. So the upper estimates I gave basically follows from these results. This plus this asymptotic, so you get Cn plus. Now I may just give, to finish, a nice corollary also. And the corollary is, corresponds to computing the Euler characteristic. Of course, with Nermin, so we did bound the expected Betti number, so we can also compute the expected Euler characteristic. So I didn't mention. So you just do specialize at t equals -1, and then this phase polynomial computes the Euler characteristic of the epsilon. So specialize. And now, so again, I put the hypothesis. So K still be a finite n-dimensional simplicial complex. Then, so the expected Euler characteristic plus the Euler characteristic of the complex equals the sum p equals 0 to n of -1 to the power p divided by 2 to the power p times fp of k, which is the phase polynomial of k evaluated at -1/2. And this has a bit striking consequence, but which was already known. In particular, so if instead of a finite, any kind of simplex, you take a triangulation of a closed even-dimensional manifold. So in particular, if K is a triangulation of a closed 2n-dimensional manifold, well then, turns out, the Euler characteristic is the sum p equals 0 to n of -1 to the power p times fp of k, which is exactly what you expect. And this is correct. Of course, this could be a definition of the Euler characteristic. I take the alternate sum of the number of p simplex. But I can as well divide by 2 to the power p. And this is an integer. It gives the Euler characteristic for any closed n-dimensional manifold. But this was known. So it was observed by Akita. In the 2008. But it's actually also follows from a result of McDonald in the 70s. It's completely straightforward consequence of a result of McDonald. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Please use microphone.
Yeah, good. No. Since you started with an analogy with Viro patchworking, can you get some result about random topology of hypersurface which is constructed by Viro patchworking? With some modification?
I would say yes. So, but if you set the problem, yes. So for zero patchwork, so you start with a triangulation of Newton polytope. Let's say I'm in dimension 2, so Newton polygon. So then there is one thing. So you put collection of signs. So there are these rules. So you have to reflect the polytope 4 times.
But can you do it in the positive quadrant? Not to reflect signs. That's topology in the first quadrant.
But polycentric subdivision is very unnatural.
No, the relation is not fixed.
But that's.
You have signs to choose and triangulation.
Well, so there is this hypothesis that the triangulation is convex.
That doesn't change this, the expectation of.
Well, the problem. So for a fixed triangulation, we can compute this. No, if you take barycentric subdivision, it's no more convex. So I don't care. So the answer in principle, and now to reflect the rule of sign is not that much a problem as well, actually.
If you start with a convex triangulation, the barycentric subdivision is convex.
I guess it doesn't, but it would be too nice.
Because you can just perturb your convex function.
For one simplex, yes, but can you do it? Well, I don't know. Well, in any case, you didn't do it, but I think it's. You sure?
I think so.
Should be checked.
Other questions? Okay. So can you comment maybe about the lower bounds? There's a CP and minus. Is there some sort of like a
Yes, so
existence of all topologies? Or?
for the lower bound, we proceed in the same spirit of what we did with Damien Gaillet. So well, for the lower bound, I'm sorry, it's hard to answer this question in just a minute.
My fault, sorry.
So
Okay, maybe a rough idea.
yeah. So for the lower bound, there is So there is a notion of complexity of manifold showing up. For instance, let me first tell you this. So if you take any closed, say, to be consistent with notation, sigma, say even any closed manifold, or since I only discuss hypersurfaces here, say any closed hypersurface of Rn, then you may start with replace Rn with the standard n-dimensional simplex, and then you may start to take barycentric subdivision, and basically question what is the minimal number of times you have to subdivide in order to be able to construct sigma as a zero type of hypersurface. This is a notion, a kind of a complexity of, say, mk of sigma is the minimal number of times you need to subdivide the standard n simplex in order to be able to construct, to find epsilon such that, say, sigma equals v epsilon, or is included in v epsilon. And then if you start with any simplicial complex k, so you subdivide d. So instead of subdividing d times, I only subdivide d minus this fixed. Once you fix sigma, your favorite topological, the torus, the two torus. Say you want to bound the first Betti number. You like the torus as something which has non-trivial first Betti number. So then I only subdivide d minus m times k. So still it has the correct asymptotic because m is a constant. And now in each n-dimensional simplex of this, I can subdivide the fixed number m times and produce basically sigma inside. And this way, we are able to compute for every sigma, actually, the expected number of connected components homeomorphic to sigma. Number of connected components of v epsilon diffeomorphic to sigma. So each time, so this is more precise, but we did already this with Damien. Each time you fix some topological type of hypersurface in Rn, you are given this random hypersurface v epsilon, you may forget all connected components except those which are homeomorphic to sigma. In this context, a homeomorphic. And you only keep those one. You have several, maybe zero, connected component diffeomorphic to sigma. You average this. What is the expected number of such connected components? And it turns out, with Nermin, we are able to bound from below this expected number by some positive constant. And then deduce the C minus from this. Okay.
Any other question?
Is it true that your main estimate does not fill the topology of K at all? So this estimate is the same if we take just a disjoint unit of several simplices.
That's true. That's true.
Then it is somehow unclear why the Euler characteristic of K appears in the corollary. How can it? If the topology of K is not
because your first claim was only for the asymptotic. The asymptotic only in the limit C's, the top dimensional simplices. Whereas you see this result is not just asymptotic, it's for any simplicial complex. And so this corollary is for any simplicial complex, is not just for the asymptotic.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
How to prove this theorem about Euler characteristic of even manifold? Why it holds for even dimensional manifolds and doesn't hold for
Well, from our own results, I can already answer. Because you see the second part is a consequence of the first. Now, if K is even dimensional, the hypersurface V epsilon are odd dimensional. And even though there are just homology manifolds, Poincare duality holds true for such homology manifolds, so that the Euler characteristic of a node of this odd triangulated homology manifold is 0. So you see the second as a consequence of the first, because when K is a triangulation of an even dimensional manifold, this Euler characteristic vanishes. So that in a sense, this result extends or generalizes, if you want.
And the original proof was also through consideration of this dual complex. The original proof, you mentioned that this theorem was already proven. You said that this Euler characteristic. So the original proof of this theorem that the Euler characteristic of even dimensional manifold can be obtained in this way in triangulation. Yes. Did it also use this dual complex? Did it also use this?
No. No, but let me tell you. Let me tell you the theorem of McDonald. Well, I should say it's actually extremely easy to prove. Well, either it's wrong or it's easy to prove anyway. So you have this phase polynomial of the simplex. So I correct with Nermin, so we introduce this. You just correct this by removing the Euler characteristic of K times T. Now what is an even more striking theorem, I would say, of McDonald. So if K is a triangulated homology manifold, so no condition on the dimension, then we have this symmetry Rk of minus, I think minus 1 minus T or plus, equals, well, you will correct it, minus 1 to the power the dimension or dimension plus 1. So I have to think a little bit to here there is T. So this is a polynomial of degree n plus 1. This is a polynomial of degree n plus 1. So this gives you the sign here. C'est correct? N plus 1. And the sign is correct. So you see, this is an involution. T goes to minus 1 minus T. It's an involution on R with fixed point minus 1/2. So for even dimensional manifold, well, this is what? Minus 1. And when you specialize at T equals minus 1/2, you see that the value of this at -1/2 should be 0. 0, which implies that when you specialize the phase polynomial as -1/2, it should be the Euler characteristics. So that's why I was saying that this result is a quick consequence of this theorem of McDonald, which I found even more striking. And now your question would become how to prove this. And this is extremely easy to prove, like 4 lines, and it comes from the so-called Dehn-Somerville relations. So if you start to study a bit simplicial complex, you immediately, first thing you meet are these Dehn-Somerville relations. We sort of generalize the fact that in a manifold, n-1 simplex is the boundary of 2n simplex. This is one of a collection of Dehn-Somerville relations, which imply this.
Okay. Thank you very much. So let's thank the speaker again.